In terms of mechanical ventilation, we have different parameters we are looking at. So the pH, there is an impact of multiple factors. It's not just the ventilation, it's also the perfusion, not only in the lungs, but also in the peripheral circulation. So ventilation itself may compromise your peripheral perfusion by affecting cardiac filling and circulation. So please remember that you may be overdoing the ventilation. If the CO2 is low and your capillary filling is prolonged and your base excess is increasing, that means it's because of over distension. BPD is related to barotrauma and volute trauma. Please don't overdo ventilation. Your aim of ventilation is to support the baby in a physiological manner, to tide over their problem. You're not going to overdo, and overdoing often is an important problem in medicine. You also have to assess the fluid balance, whether you restrict fluids if there is a PDA, whether you want to give more fluid if the baby looks dry. Role of facilitating TPN can be considered in the extreme preterms, and of course there is a physiologic bicarbonate loss, and we discussed that earlier. So the goals of ventilation are to maintain the oxygenation and effective ventilation with maintaining PCO2 levels. We should minimize the work of breathing and optimize the outcome. We should avoid both short and long-term complications. So we discussed all this during the series on ventilation, and I would quickly run through this, but the factors related to blood gas is how you interpret. So in terms of PCO2, we should avoid hypocapnia at any cost, because hypocapnia reduces your peripheral perfusion. There is a risk of periventricular leukomalacia and neurodevelopmental abnormality as a result of prolonged hypocapnia. So the number of times a baby gets hypocapnic, the duration to which the baby is hypocapnic, these are important. We should also remember that the pulmonary vessels constrict when there is hypoxia, hypercapnia and acidemia. So these are parameters we should avoid, especially in a sick newborn baby when the pulmonary pressures are still labile. And when there is pulmonary hypertension, previously we used to overventilate to wash out CO2, but we don't do that anymore, because anything that you're overdoing damages the lung more, and you're flogging the lung unnecessarily to get a low CO2, which is a very temporary effect. So if you support the baby by alternative means, you will reach the same effect. So we still maintain the CO2 in the lower side of normal. We shouldn't wash out CO2 with overventilation. This applies very importantly for babies with diaphragmatic hernia as well, where you accept a slightly lower pH, you accept a slightly high PCO2 when you want to avoid overdoing ventilation. So the high carbon dioxide tension with elevated hydrogen ion concentration increases the extracellular calcium influx, which is thought to be the main cause of vasoconstriction in the pulmonary circulation. So this is about the hypocapnia. In terms of hypercapnia, most of us from the time we trained, when I was training like early 1990s, permissive hypercapnia was already in vogue, and the extent to which you do permissive hypercapnia is what is debated. A very high PCO2 in the first week of life in an extreme preterm can increase risk of IVH because it causes cerebral vasodilation. This is in a baby where the autoregulation is not well controlled as well, so we should be careful, especially if there is asphyxia. Hypercapnia is not encouraged, because the autoregulation is going to be bad in these babies. The Felbate trials by Thome et al. And other studies did not show that aggressive use of permissive hypercapnia offered significant benefits in improving BPD or other outcomes. There is, of course, a potential higher risk of complications, due to which the Felbate trial was stopped early. So they used a target range in the high target group of 55 to 65 millimeter on days 1 to 3, going up to 60 to 70 on days 4 to 6, and 65 to 75 on days 7 to 14. And the control group was 40 to 50 on days 1 to 3, 45 to 55 on days 4 to 6. So this is between permissive hypercapnia and more aggressive permissive hypercapnia. So here in the control group itself, we do have permissive hypercapnia, which most of us use. And remember that these are different if you use capillary samples, because capillary CO2 is going to be higher than the arterial CO2 by 3 to 5 millimeter of mercury. So the message here is that you can have permissive hypercapnia to a reasonable degree. Be careful in the first 3 days. Be careful in asphyxiated babies, so better to keep them in the normal range. And even in PPHN, you don't want hypocapnia, and you also want to avoid hypercapnia. You want the CO2 in the 35 to 40 millimeter range. So this is a quick diagram to show you the impact. Suppose your blood gas shows hypercapnia and your oxygen requirements are rising. That means you need to increase the mean airway pressure by any of these measures. You can increase peak inspiratory pressure, and if the lung volume is closed down, The PEEP increase will help you recruit the lung volume, and so it may actually paradoxically improve the CO2 as well. But anything that improves the delta P will improve the CO2, and increasing the PEEP on its own in a well-distended lung may actually improve only the oxygenation. It may not improve the CO2. So the oxygenation can be impacted by the FiO2 and anything that increases the mean airway pressure, which is the shaded area under the curve, which can be increase in the PIP, increase in the PEEP, and change in the IE ratio where you increase the inspiration, and change in the flow where square wave will cause a more quick inflation of the lung. So this is a square wave caused by increasing flow, and a sine wave when the flow is a bit slower. So a steep rise will increase the area under the curve. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, it's tidal volume times rate, and so anything that increases the minute ventilation will increase the carbon dioxide washout. So increasing in the PIP and increasing in the rate are the mainstay when it comes to CO2 removal. So changes in the PIP affect both PaO2 and PaCO2 by effects on tidal volume and MAP. The high PIP may increase the risk of volute trauma, so be careful when you make changes. Make only essential changes. The adequacy is checked by inflation, and you consider doing a blood gas. You don't need a blood gas for every single change you do, but it's a good practice. If the changes were significant, you repeat to the blood gas. If the previous gas was significantly abnormal, you do need to check again. The positive end expiratory pressure prevents alveolar collapse. It maintains the lung volume at end expiration and improves VQ mismatch. Increased PEEP improves the MAP and improves the FRC, thus it improves oxygenation. In a closed down lung, increasing the PEEP by improving the FRC improves carbon dioxide washout as well. So this is an important concept in the acute phase of the disease. So PEEP increase doesn't always lead to CO2 retention. You need an adequate PEEP to open the lungs well before you can consider other changes. If disproportionately high PEEP is used, you get over distension causing CO2 retention. And we discussed about the impact on the venous return cardiac output and also the iatrogenic pulmonary hypertension due to increased pulmonary vascular resistance. Your lung blood vessels are also compressed, so you're actually worsening the situation by over distending. So increase in PIP, increasing in PEEP beyond a certain degree are both important in causing these iatrogenic problems, which we should avoid at all costs. The rate, obviously, we use a slightly higher ventilatory rate, and we discussed that in the ventilation series. I'm not repeating it. However, remember that rate adjustments are important for carbon dioxide. And also remember that in high frequency, increasing the rate is one of the measures we use when you have CO2 washout. And if you have CO2 retention, you drop the rate on high frequency to make your ventilation more effective. When I say rate on high frequency, it's a frequency, sorry. In the management of sick babies, blood gas is important to evaluate shock and its management. Lactate is a very important tool. Those of you who do PICU, they use lactate a much greater level than in the NICU. However, in an asphyxiated baby or in a baby in shock or in a post-operative baby, lactate is a very important tool. Many surgeons use lactate as a tool in necrotizing enterocolitis as well. The response to treatment can be assessed based on improvement in pH and lactate levels. The need for fluid replacement, blood transfusion, etc. can be assessed based on blood gas readings as well. So the pH and the base excess are going to be the key here. And obviously, if the CO2 is rising in a child with shock, you should take over the effort of breathing by ventilating them. So be aggressive in shock management, ventilate them. And echocardiography role is very important. And recently we have NIRS as a measure of VO2, which is systemic circulation and in the brain vessels, and comparing them may give you an indication of how to correct the shock. As clinical examples before we close, so this is a baby where the pH is 7.18, PCO2 is 55, PO2 is 60, bicarbonate is 13, and base excess is -11. So when we interpret the blood gas, we look at whether it is acidosis or alkalosis, and this is obviously acidosis. Then we look at the direction of the change. The carbon dioxide is high, so it is respiratory acidosis. The bicarbonate is low, it is metabolic acidosis. So this is a mixed picture, and a mixed picture is not uncommon in babies because they are sick babies where you have a lung disease, and the lung disease is leading to metabolic problems due to poor perfusion, poor oxygenation, and so on. So this is a typical picture we get in a baby with respiratory distress syndrome, for example. So it's not a single direction change. There is no compensation here because the child is too unwell. And if the CO2 continues rising, or if the baby is in a high oxygen requirement, you'd make the decision to give surfactant for this baby if it's a preterm baby with respiratory distress. If the same happens with the term baby with meconium aspiration, your approach would be to support the ventilation, correct the carbon dioxide. The perfusion may improve on its own. So the bicarbonate is usually a secondary response to the oxygenation difficulty. The PO2 obviously depends on the FiO2. I didn't tell you what the FiO2 was, and if the PO2 is disproportionately low compared to the FiO2, it means there is the AADO2 ratio is affected, so obviously the lung is diseased. So this is a baby, a preterm baby with respiratory distress syndrome, and based on this gas and the work of breathing as well as oxygen requirement being close to 40%, we decided to give surfactant. Because the base deficit was high, we kept the baby on ventilator for 2 to 3 hours. We repeated a gas. When the perfusion improved and the acidosis improved, we extubated the baby. So these babies are probably not good candidates for the LISA or MIST, but you can do it if the baby clinically looks stable. So in this example, we have the same pH. The PCO2 is 64 and the bicarbonate is normal. So this is more respiratory acidosis. Depending on the condition of the baby, you decide to support either with CPAP or with ventilation. The baby is still compensated, and the correction will start over time because the metabolic compensation takes time. The respiratory compensation is quicker. So same pH can have different pictures, and the same gas, according to the condition of the baby, according to the story, your interventions will differ. I'm not giving you a lot of examples because each case is different, but the main things is how to interpret and how to look at the summary of the whole case. You have to look at the perfusion of the baby, you have to look at the fluid volume, fluid balance of the baby, you have to look at infection as a consideration, and you have to correct the ventilatory support as needed. And in a very sick baby, you have to take over the breathing, the mechanical ventilation, because tiring out and the effort of breathing and everything will add to the sickness. So to summarize, blood gas measurement is a very important tool in NICU care. A sound understanding of the basics is important in deciding what to do, when to do the blood gas, and how to act based on the results. So I hope it's useful, and thank you for being here. And